Boom. All right. So we went in and we started setting up our supply and demand analysis. So we went in, we started looking at the demand side first, and we made the assumption that the quantity demanded of a good is some function of the price. So we simply said the price is going to affect the amount that buyers are willing and able to buy. So after we went through and talked about all the information that demanders have, we came up with the conclusion that there is a negative relationship between the price and quantity demanded, showing that if price goes up, quantity demanded goes down, and as price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. That is what gives us the downward slope of the demand curve. Once we got that, we set that aside and then started looking at the supply side, the amount that sellers would be willing and able to sell. So we made the assumption that the quantity supplied was also going to be some function of price. But then we went in and asked the question, well, what is the nature of that relationship? And through brute force intuition, we came up with the idea that that was actually a positive relationship. So we now know as price goes up, profit motivation goes up, thus the amount that the seller will be willing and hopefully able to sell is going to increase as well. So those variables are going to be moving in the same direction. So once we got the supply and demand curves all straightened out, last time we went in and we found what we call equilibrium. So we actually set a market up. We brought the demanders in with the downward slope of the demand curve. We brought the suppliers in with the upward slope of the supply curve, and then we watched them haggle over price and quantity. So we said if we're lucky, we are going to come to a point which we called equilibrium. And in equilibrium, there is one equilibrium price, we called it P naught, and there is going to be one equilibrium quantity. And as it turns out, the quantity at that particular point right there, the quantity demanded is going to be equal to the quantity that is being supplied. Or again, another way to say this is the amount that buyers are willing and able to buy is exactly equal to the amount that sellers are willing and able to sell. And so therefore, both the buyers and the demanders are going to be happy with that particular situation. And then we went in and we took this identity right here, and we went in and we plugged in some numeric formulas into that, some equations, and we actually derived equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity given those equations. All right, so that's where we ended up, I believe, last time. So does anyone have any questions about the derivation of the demand curve, the supply curve, the idea of equilibrium, or the derivation or the manipulation of the equations, if you will, to find equilibrium price and quantity? Is everybody good with that? All right. What I want to do then today is build on this idea just a little bit, because I made the statement that if we are lucky and the point where buyers and sellers are both going to be happy with this situation is if, in fact, we are in equilibrium. But I also want you to think that if we go in and we look at a particular commodity and that commodity is, in fact, in equilibrium, how much of that commodity are you going to see on the shelf? Interesting question, huh? If we are truly in equilibrium, what are you going to see on the store shelves? The psychologists really like to hear themselves talk, don't they? No? How about nothing? Because what should happen is the amount that sellers are putting out for sale should, as they put it out on the shelf within a reasonable time frame, it should be walking right back out the door. And so we really shouldn't see anything sitting on the shelves at all, should we? Should there be people lined up waiting for that item to be put on the shelf? No, right? And there shouldn't be a whole lot on the shelf at any particular time. So whatever is coming in should go right back out the door again. That's not what we see, is it? So what that tells us is that somewhere along the line, these markets are in fact not in equilibrium. So what we are going to go in and talk about today is what happens, or how do we determine whether or not these markets are in equilibrium? And if they're not, how is the market going to try to adjust itself to get back to that point where both the demanders and suppliers are happy with this situation? So let's go in, let's draw ourselves a very simple market. We have quantity down here and price. Let's bring our demanders in with a downward sloping demand curve, and our suppliers with an upward sloping supply curve. And let's just assume for the moment that given everything that the buyers and sellers know about the market, the equilibrium price, P naught, let's say that happens to be $10. And at $10, our equilibrium quantity, let's say, is going to be 100 units of the good. All right, so that will be the market in equilibrium. Now, as it turns out, there's a number of disturbances that are going to be running through these markets. And we're going to talk a little bit later about what those disturbances are. All we want to do today is really look at the mechanics of where these disturbances actually come from. So let's go in for a moment and let's just say that the price in this market has actually been perturbed above equilibrium. Right? So let's say that the price actually goes up to $15. You've seen this before, is that not right? No, okay, you got it, okay, right. I just want to make sure I'm not, because sometimes people sit there and look at me and let me talk over myself. I forgot to mark in my notes, so we have not done this, is that correct? No. So this is new stuff, okay, thank you. So let's assume then that the price, the going market price, is going to be equal to $15. Okay, now keep clear what we have here. If you look at this graph and I ask you, what is the equilibrium price? You would tell me $10. That's where everyone would be happy. But if a consumer walks in the door and picks up the good and looks at the price tag, what does that price tag say? $15. Okay. So that's the difference between these two prices that I have here. So this is what the price actually is on the good right now. So here's what I want you to do. Take at that $15 and I want you to draw yourself a dotted line all the way across where it strikes both the demand and the supply curves. And then I want you to go in and tell yourself this story. At the going market price of $15, if you follow this line across where it strikes the demand curve, which is right here, that is going to give you the quantity demanded, the amount that buyers would be willing and able to buy. Right? Let's just say that happens to be 50 units of the good. At the price of $15, if you follow this line across where it strikes the supply curve, that's going to tell us how much the sellers are going to be willing and able to sell. So let's say that goes all the way up to 150 units of the good. Nonetheless, what you notice is, in this particular case, the quantity supplied of the good is greater than the quantity that's demanded. And if that situation is happening in the market, this is what we call a market surplus. A market surplus. So sellers are willing and able to sell more than buyers are willing and able to buy. And it turns out that we can actually measure the amount of the surplus itself, because the surplus is the actual distance between the supply and the demand curves. So in this case, the surplus is going to be equal to the quantity that is being supplied minus the quantity that is being demanded. So you notice that does give you the distance between the curves. If you take the quantity supplied, which is this amount right here, minus quantity demanded, that will give you the distance between the supply and demand curves. So in this particular case, at the price of $15, the quantity supplied is 150 units. The quantity demanded is 50 units of the good. So the amount of the surplus, PLUS, whoops. The amount of the surplus is going to be equal to 100 units of the good. Okay, so that's how you go in, and that's how you recognize, and that's how you actually measure the amount of the surplus itself. Questions? Now, I want you to understand, and I don't want to lose this within the graphing itself. Remember, we're talking about human behavior here. So the question ultimately is, if we are out of equilibrium, then someone is unhappy with the price of $15. So the ultimate question is, who's unhappy here? All right, I want you to look at this for just a moment. If everybody was happy with the price of $15, is there any reason for the demander to be unhappy with the price of $15? Is there any reason for the demanders to be unhappy with that price?
Yeah, it's more expensive.
All right. So when you look at this, demanders never like higher prices, right? Because you're not able to buy as much of it as you did before. So it's a higher price. So demanders don't like it. All right. Is there any reason for this seller to be happy with the higher price?
Yes.
Because?
To make more
Because
money.
they get more money.
Very good. If that price goes up and they're able to sell it, then they're going in and they're making more money per unit. So that's a good thing. But is there any reason for the seller to be unhappy with the higher price?
Yes. Yeah. They're not making as many sales.
Very good. This is going in and saying, hey, look, at the price of $15, the sellers may be willing and able to sell 150 units, but how much are they actually selling? 50 units, what the buyers are actually buying. That's perfect, which, by the way, is less than what it was in equilibrium. So from the seller's point of view, that price of $15, it's a double-edged sword, right? If they can sell it, they make more money. The problem is demanders aren't buying as much as they did before. So in all honesty, there's every reason in the world for both the demander and the sellers to be unhappy with the price of $15. So the result of this entire thing is that price is going to try to work its way back down towards equilibrium. All right, so if the price is $15, the price is going to have to fall to get back down towards the $10 equilibrium. Now, keep in mind the relationships, right, between quantity demanded and quantity supplied. So as price goes down, what's going to happen to quantity demanded? It's going to go up. It's going to rise. It's going to move back towards equilibrium. As price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. As price goes down, what happens to quantity supplied? It reduces as well, because we know there's that positive relationship. So as price goes down, quantity supplied is going to start moving itself back toward equilibrium. And so the price is going to continue to fall. Quantity demanded will continue to rise. Quantity supplied will continue to fall until we get back down to the price of $10. And at the price of $10, demanders will say, hey, I'm willing and able to buy 100 units of the good. Suppliers will say, hey, I'm willing and able to sell you 100 units of the good. And the market clears, and both the demanders and the suppliers are happy with that situation. Okay, so that's how you go in, and that's how you recognize, that's how you measure, and then that's how you go in and how the market will try to adjust itself to get back to its equilibrium point. All right, questions about the surplus situation? All right, let's go in and let's take the opposite situation then. So let's go in, let's draw ourselves another market. We have quantity and we have price. Downward sloping demand curve, market with a D. Upward sloping supply curve, market with an S. All right, equilibrium is always where the demand and supply curves meet. So let's say in this particular case, P naught is going to be equal to $20. And our equilibrium quantity of the good is going to be 1,000 units. Okay, so there's our starting point. Now again, let's assume for the moment that a disturbance has run through this market. Again, we don't care what that is right now. But what that disturbance has done is actually move the price below equilibrium. Let's call it P2. Let's say it goes in and falls down to $15. Now again, if I were to ask you, what is equilibrium? You would tell me 20. What is the price tag on the item? You would tell me $15. All right, so again, the mechanics of it says, if that is the going market price, then go in and draw yourself a dotted line all the way across, or it strikes both the demand and the supply curves. Now, in this situation, though, which if you start at $15, which curve does it strike first? The supply curve. So that's right here. That's going to tell us the quantity supplied. Let's say that drops down to 700 units of the good. If you continue to follow this dotted line all the way across, at the price of $15, there's the quantity demanded. Let's say that happens to be 1,500 units of the good. All right, so it's clear we're not in equilibrium here. And in fact, in this particular case, the quantity demanded of the good is greater than the quantity that is being supplied. So if that situation is in this market, we call it a shortage. So buyers are willing and able to buy more than sellers are willing and able to sell. And again, we can actually measure the damage that is being done in these particular markets, because it's going to be the distance between the demand and supply curves at the going market price. So there's your market shortage. So we can actually measure that. So I'm going to do it over here. So the shortage is going to be equal to the quantity demanded minus the quantity that is being supplied. So with the numbers that I have here, the quantity demanded is 1,500 minus the quantity supplied, which is 700. So the amount of the shortage is what? 800, yeah. It's 800 units of the good. All right, there we go. So that's how you recognize and actually measure the shortage situation. All right, now again, keep in mind what's happening here. With the price below equilibrium, somebody's unhappy with this situation. So if you ask yourself, all right, wait a minute, is there any reason for the sellers to be unhappy with the price of $15?
Yes.
And what would that be?
They're not making as much money per se.
Very good. When prices go down, that squeezes that profit margin. That's never good for a seller, right? So sellers don't like this situation. Is there any reason for the demanders to be happy with the price of $15?
Yes.
Because
It's cheap.
it's cheaper, right? We like lower prices. It's a good thing. But are lower prices always a good thing?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily, because in this case, we may be willing and able to buy 1,500 units. How much are we actually buying? 700 units, what the seller is actually selling us. So actually, again, in all reality, there's a reason for both the demander and the supplier to be unhappy with the price of $15. So the market then is going to try to go in and correct itself. And so to do that, the price in the market is going to have to tend up back towards equilibrium. So the price is going to start to increase in the market. As the price goes up, what do we know happens to quantity demanded?
It goes down.
It goes down. So as price goes up, we don't buy as much. Quantity demanded starts coming back towards equilibrium. As price goes up, what happens to quantity supplied?
Increases.
It increases. And so it starts tending back towards equilibrium. So the price will go up, quantity supplied will rise, quantities demanded will fall until we get back to the price of $20. And at that price, demanders will say, hey, I'm willing and able to buy 1,000 units of the good. Sellers will say, hey, I'm willing and able to sell 1,000 units of the good. The market clears and both demanders and suppliers are happy with that particular situation. Okay, so there is what we call disequilibrium analysis. This is a free market situation in which the government is out of this. The price and quantities are allowed to adjust the way they need to go in and achieve that equilibrium in these markets. All right, very good. Questions about the reading of the graphs, where the quantity demanded, quantity supplied came from, the equations, what have you. Is everybody good with that? All right, keep that handy. We're going to be doing a worksheet here in just a few minutes dealing with this particular information. But what I want to go ahead and do today, because I made the statement a while ago that this is a free market. When people talk about free market situations, this is it, right? So the price and the quantity are allowed to go in and adjust the way they need to. The problem is, though, we already know from a discussion a while back that we actually live in a mixed market economy where the government does have a say in these particular markets. And keep in mind, the government comes into these particular markets when they believe that the market is not going to either bring about the appropriate solution or bring about that solution in an appropriate time frame. So the question then is, what does government intervention look like in these particular markets? All right, let's go in and let's take a prime example of this. Let's go in and look at the market for corn. Actually, you can look at corn, wheat, soybeans, milk, right? You name it. A whole bunch of agricultural products are going to look exactly like this. All right, so we have our price up here and we have quantity. Let's go in. Here's our downward sloping demand curve for corn. And here is our upward sloping supply curve. All right, now let's assume for right now, given everything that the market knows about what's going on here, let's say our equilibrium price turns out to be, let's say $3.50 per bushel. So P naught is equal to $3.50. And our equilibrium quantity, I'm just going to call it Q naught, however many millions of bushels of corn that happens to be. Put a number on it if you like. Now, keep in mind, this is what the market says the corn is worth. But the government may step into this situation and say, well, wait a minute, though. We understand that's what the market says the corn is worth. But if you go in and you look at the farmer situation, at the high price of fertilizers, the high cost of farm equipment, the high cost of crop insurance and fuel and all the other stuff, right, that we have going on out there. If we, the government, allow $3.50 to be the market price, there's going to be a lot of farmers that are going to go out of business because they can't make any money. So the government may step in and insert what is called a price floor. A price floor is a legally established minimum price. Price floor is a legally established minimum price. And by the way, a price floor specifically is there to protect sellers in a market from these low prices. Legally established minimum price, it's there to protect sellers from these low prices. So think about it for a moment. If the government believes that $3.50 is too low, then where are they going to put the price floor? Higher than that, right? Because they want the price to be higher. So let's go in and let's install our price floor, PF. Let's install our price floor and let's say $5 per bushel. Okay, now I want you to note something. In this particular case, this is a law that has been passed. So I'm going to draw a solid line all the way across this. Because if this is a legally established minimum price, then the government is saying, you know what? Anything that is less than $5 is illegal. Right? You simply cannot buy and sell corn for anything less than $5 per bushel. So anything above it is perfectly fine. So if you want to buy and sell corn for $5 a bushel, that's up to you. If you want to buy and sell it for $50 or $500 a bushel, that's up to you. But nothing less than $5 per bushel. So what that means is that the price of $3.50 is in fact illegal at this particular point. So if it's illegal, then the price is going to be bumped up to the $5 per bushel. And by the way, if this helps you out, the way I kept this straight in my mind when I was first introduced to this, if you're talking about a floor is something you can't go below, right? So anything above it is perfectly fine. You can't go below a floor, right? Maybe in your mind, that'll help you out just a little bit. So now what happens is if $3.50 is illegal, now the price becomes $5 per bushel. So if that is the going market price, as you follow this line across where it strikes the demand curve, there is going to be your quantity that is being demanded. If you follow this across where it strikes the supply curve, there's your quantity that is being supplied at the price of $5. So if the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded, shortage or surplus, surplus, and there was a surplus in the market for corn in this particular situation. So there's how we go in, and that's how we show government intervention and why the government would step into a market like this. Oh, and by the way, since this is a price floor on an agricultural product, we actually call this a farm price support. That's the actual name of this price floor. It is a farm price support. So basically, the government is going in and jacking that price up in an effort to go in and allow the farmers to get a better price for their particular commodity. Okay, now is everybody all right with the logistics of what we have done? Now, the question ultimately becomes, the government is supposed to get involved in these markets to help out the sellers. Well, I guess the ultimate question is, did they really help the farmers out, right, when they did this? So if you look at this, you say, well, aren't the farmers getting a higher price for their commodity? Well, yes, they are. But the problem is they may be willing and able to sell this much corn, but how much are they actually selling? This down here. So they're actually selling less than what they were, even though the price is a little bit higher than what it was before. So in all honesty, if the government simply left it this way, the farmers really wouldn't be better off than they were before. So why do it in the first place? All right, well, this is where the government cheats, particularly in the agricultural market. Because what ends up happening in these particular situations with the farm price supports, it is a win-win for the farmer because the government buys the surplus. They outright buy the surplus. So it's a win-win for the farmer because, first of all, they're getting a higher price for their product than they would have if it was left up to the market. And now, instead of selling QD, now they're actually selling QS. So they're actually selling more than what they were in equilibrium, now at a higher price. Right. So it's a win-win for the farmer. From the consumer's point of view, this is actually a lose-lose situation. And the reason I say that is, you may not think to yourself, well, I'm not a consumer of corn. I'm not buying corn, am I? Actually, you are. You may not be going out and buying the raw product of corn, but if you go out and you do any label reading whatsoever, there's some sort of corn byproduct in almost everything that you eat, right? Somewhere along the line. So what has ended up happening is when the government went in and jacked the price of corn up, they made you go into the marketplace, the grocery store, and pay more for your food products, is essentially what ended up happening. Oh, and if that's not bad enough, when I say the government buys the surplus, well, whose money do they use to buy the surplus? The taxpayers' money. So we have to pay two ways. We pay in higher prices and the taxes to buy the surplus anyway.
So
right?
Does that mean that the farmers also purchase their own surplus? Because they pay tax and then the government uses that tax money to buy the surplus?
I guess to some extent, but the way the tax laws are written and so on, they get to write off all of their fertilizers and corn seed and all that kind of stuff. So maybe to some extent, because they pay taxes, a little bit of that is going back in. But because of the business tax aspect, it's not the same as for you and I. They're using all of our tax money because we don't get to write off the raw materials in the first place. So to some extent, but largely the burden of this all falls on the consumer themselves. Yeah. All right, very good. Okay, is everybody good with this particular price floor? By the way, this one seems like, actually, this one comes into play considerably, whether you know it in your life or not. But there's another one that a lot of people, in fact, over the past couple of years, has gotten a lot of press time, and it is in the market for labor. So let's go in, let's draw ourselves another supply and demand analysis. So we have quantity here. And I want you to think about this for a moment. If this is the market for labor, specifically, let's call it the market for fast food workers in the United States. All right, so we have a downward sloping demand curve for workers. Now keep in mind who this is. Who's the demander of labor?
Employees.
No, the demander of labor.
The
The companies themselves, very good. So these are the restaurant owners, right, that are here. Oh, well, if I could spell today, my goodness. So these are the restaurant owners, right? And then the suppliers of labor are going to be the workers themselves. All right, so just kind of keep in mind who we're talking about here. All right. Now, when you're talking about an actual product, quantity and price makes perfectly good sense. But when you're talking about workers, all right, now quantity makes sense, the actual quantity of labor, the number of workers that you have. But to put actual price up here doesn't sound quite right. But what is another word for the price of labor?
Wages.
The wage. So if we put wage up here, then we can put this in a supply and demand diagram because the wage is a price. Okay, so now we can go in and do our analysis just like we would with a regular commodity. So when the demanders and suppliers get together, let's say that the equilibrium wage in this market, W naught, turns out to be $2.50 per hour. And let's say there happens to be, let's say 1.3 million workers that are willing and able to work at $2.50 per hour. Okay, so there's your equilibrium situation for fast food workers. All right, now again, the government is probably going to get involved in this market because if you have an economic goal of the equitable distribution of income, if you go in and if you have somebody that's only making $2.50 per hour, if you take $2.50 times 40 hours a week times 52 weeks out of the year, that paycheck that they're earning is well below poverty level, right? I mean, it's a very small number by the time you get done. So the government says, you know what, that's not enough money to go in and live on. So what we are going to do, we the government, we're going to go in and we're going to put in a price floor, let's say at $7.25 per hour. Does anybody know what another word for this price floor is? This is the minimum wage. Excellent. This is the minimum wage. So the minimum wage is in fact an example of a price floor. So again, in this market, we're going to draw a solid line all the way across because that denotes a wage that you cannot go below. Right? So down here is a no-no. Now, if you want to pay someone $100 an hour, that's up to you. But nothing less than $7.25 is legal in this market. So that means the wage of $2.50 is illegal, and that bumps the wage up to $7.25. So at $7.25, if you follow this line across where it strikes the demand curve, here is your quantity demanded of labor. Okay, now I want to stop here for just a moment. Do you notice the quantity of demanded of labor went down in this graph? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
And because?
Because they have to get paid more now.
True, but if I were a worker, I want to work for that wage, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right? So remember the demanders are the restaurant owners, right? Demanders are restaurant owners.
They don't want to pay very many people.
Very good. All right. So the idea is, hey, you know what? If I'm a restaurant owner, right now I have 10 employees and I'm willing to pay them $2.50 per hour. But now the government walks in and says, you know what? You can't pay them any less than $7.25 an hour, and I can't afford that. And so workers are going to be let go. So instead of having 10 workers, I might only have 6, right? And I would expect them to do more because I'm paying them more, right, to go in and do that. So I think it makes sense that the quantity demanded of labor goes down. But I want you to notice At $7.25, if you follow this line across where it strikes the supply curve, the quantity supplied of labor actually increases. Does that make sense? Because very good. There's your, that's the supply side of it right there. So if I'm a worker and I wasn't willing to work for $2.50 per hour, the higher the wage goes, the more hurdles I'm willing to jump over to get into the labor force to make more money, right? So the quantity supply goes up. Nonetheless, though, the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded. So we have a surplus of labor in the market. Now, here's where a lot of people start having problems with government intervention. Over here, when the farmers were hurt by the higher price, the government bought the surplus, right? Made it all better. Over here, when there is unemployment, does the government give these people jobs? No, they don't. So when you go in and you start looking at these situations, and be careful of this, there's a lot of hype around the minimum wage. Personally, I think the minimum wage should be completely gotten rid of because when you go in and you start toying with these markets, either you go in and you buy the surplus and you give people jobs, or you leave the markets alone, or you don't buy the surplus and you don't give people jobs, right? You need to go in and treat the markets equally instead of picking and choosing as the government what markets you're going to treat disproportionately or not. Okay, so that being said, there are two prime examples of what we call price floors in these markets. So there's part of your government intervention. Questions? No? All right, here's what we're going to do. I have a worksheet for you to complete in class, specifically dealing with the first part, not the, we're not going to be dealing with the price floors, but dealing with shortages and surpluses. So you can work in teams on this. I have no problems with that at all. On number one, up at the top, when it says to calculate the shortage or the surplus, not only tell me, is there a shortage or a surplus, I want you to tell me how much, numerically, how much of a shortage or surplus there is. Right, so make sure you give me an actual numeric value. Right. Also on number four, graph this market just like how we did last time with our quantity demanded and quantity supplied. Right? You don't have to graph every point, but all you have to do is show me equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. All right, I'll be grading these as you get done.